November 7th, 1944. Morville is France. Levi. Oberleut Friedrich Hartmann's field journal was being flipped through, while the Wehrmacht's pencils skimmed over sentences that went against all of her racial education. We were surprised by the accuracy with which these black tankers fought. From what I've seen, their coordination is superior to that of many German battalions. Either we have been grossly misled over the capability of these forces, or our intelligence has totally failed us. Something he had just seen through his binoculars had demolished 3 years' worth of Nazi racial propaganda. American black tankers commanded Sherman tanks with the same level of tactical acumen as, if not more than, seasoned Wehrmacht panzer crews. A 4-hour armored advance that managed to breach German defenses. German party officials had told the Wehrmacht that African troops were backwards and ill-equipped to fight in the current period, or operate heavy machines. In spite of this, black soldiers operated 30-ton steel equipment with lethal proficiency, in what Nazi ideology had portrayed as the weakest racial element in the United States. The 761st Tank Battalion's 712 men had just made their combat debut, taking the lead in Patton's Third Army's assault into northeastern France, rather than a supporting or limited role. All throughout the German defensive line, men were getting ready for what they thought would be a walk in the park against weaker forces. They had no idea that this very second would set in motion the greatest assault on Nazi racial ideology since the start of the war, an organized dismantling of white supremacist ideology by way of the unabashed display of black military prowess. Combat statistics, not propaganda pamphlets, were writing the mathematical collapse of ideology, which would soon destroy every belief the Wehrmacht men had about racial capability and the essence of military strength. On the 1st of April 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, the road leading up to this point had commenced. The United States Army activated the 761st Tank Battalion as part of an experiment in which it did not completely believe. Black soldiers were deemed unfit for combat positions according to 1942 American military doctrine. African Americans were consigned to work battalions, mess duties, and service jobs due to decades of institutional racism. Not a true dedication to integrated warfare, but a reluctant capitulation to political pressure from civil rights groups and black media led to the formation of the 761st. Reuben Rivers, a 2-3-year-old man from Hetalka, Oklahoma, who was born in Tecumseh, was one of the men who reported to Camp Claiborne. Rivers, who was half Cherokee and half black, had labored for the family farm and the railroad prior to receiving his draft notice in January 1942. According to his military record, he possessed an uncommon blend of mechanical talent and innate leadership qualities. New York's Leonard Smith, Pennsylvania's William McBurney, and Texas's Preston McNeil also showed up. The war and the system that segregated black Americans while demanding their duty brought these men together, representing every corner of black America. Civilian Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates presided over the battalion. He was one of the rare white officers who had faith in his troops' ability. The majority of the Army's higher-ups rejected Bates's understanding. Black soldiers, if given the chance and the right tools, could defeat any army in the world. Not the enemy forces, but the biases within his own military posed the greatest threat to him. Bates's training regimen was intentionally harsh. The 761st put in more time and effort training than comparable white troops. The decision was unanimous. There would be a constant stream of accusations of racial inferiority for any slip-up. The biases of wary upper officers would be validated with each setback. Despite the tremendous pressure, bonds were formed that were more durable than steel. Combat training on the M5 Stuart light tank took place at Camp Claiborne. The Stuart was armed with 3 machine guns of .30 caliber and a 37mm cannon. It had a top speed of 36 miles per hour, but was defenseless due to its lack of protection. In the scorching heat of Louisiana, the tankers honed their maneuvering, communication, and firefighting skills. They trained in gunnery, which included locating targets from a distance and engaging them precisely while in motion. Under real-world circumstances, they mastered maintenance tasks like fixing tracks, replacing road wheels, and servicing motors. They educated themselves in radio technique, the specialized vocabulary needed to coordinate tank movements on the battlefield. It required a lot of work to be trained. During the summer in Louisiana, the inside of the tanks may reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The crews worked on their cooperation until it was second nature. Everyone from the driver to the gunner to the loader to the commander had to work together like a well-oiled machine. Immediate action was required per the order of the tank commander. Even though the vehicle was in motion, the gunner still had to aim precisely. There could be no pauses as the loader fed ammunition into the gun. As they navigated the terrain, the driver had to keep an eye on the fuel gauge and how well the engine was doing. It was a triumph. Their ratings for competency were on par with veteran white armored units by the time the battalion relocated to Camp Livingston in August 1942 for large-scale maneuvers. Their technical skill, tactical awareness, and discipline were observed by observers. They did a fantastic job in practice fights against other units. Their track records for upkeep were impeccable. They scored well in gunnery. It seemed like they were prepared for battle from every angle. Despite their greatness, no deployment instructions were issued. The trend became apparent when the 761st stayed stateside, while white tank battalions were sent to North Africa, Italy, and finally France. Although the army was prepared to train black tankers, it was hesitant to send them into battle. The official justifications differed. There weren't enough black support staff, according to some leaders, to keep a black tank battalion going in battle. Some people thought that white infantry wouldn't take black tank reinforcements. Others just said that further observation was needed before deploying this experiment in the field. Simplified was the true explanation. Black soldiers were not seen as capable fighters by the army. Despite the ongoing war overseas, the 761st remained in training due to this assumption, which was based on racism rather than evidence. They trained month after month. They were a part of the Third Army's maneuvers at Camp Polk in April 1943. Hundreds of square kilometers of territory were covered in these massive drills, which involved thousands of men and simulated battle scenarios. Once more, they were outstanding. The lack of orders was a recurring theme. The annoyance ate away at him. Because of their race, these guys were bound to an interminable training cycle after volunteering or being drafted to resist fascism. They were cognizant of the irony. While confronted with racial discrimination in the United States, they were also getting ready to combat Nazi racial philosophy. While stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, the bitter paradox intensified. The 761st was equipped with medium tank Sherman M4S, starting in September 1943. Subsequent upgrades increased the Sherman's main gun's caliber from 75mm to 76mm. Its firepower could efficiently engage German armor, and it had greater armor to protect the crew. The tank needed a crew of 5 men and weighed about 30 tons. Over the course of the war, the United States manufactured more Sherman tanks than any other brand, making it the backbone of their armored forces. In order to become experts with the new tools, the men dove headfirst. When compared to the Stuart, the Sherman was more intricate, enhanced in size, mass, and strength. A new approach was necessary. Its more advanced fire control systems, larger turning radius, and higher fuel consumption were all challenges that the crew eventually learned to overcome. They rehearsed intricate tactical movements, coordinated with soldiers, and fired the main gun. They were very good, very fast. All of the training reports showed how excited they were to get combat-ready equipment, yet Fort Hood was located in Jim Crow-era Texas. Their treatment was at odds with their objective, and it became intolerable. They had never experienced either freedom or democracy, yet they were learning to fight for them. Even while they were off-duty, black soldiers encountered segregation in all public spaces, distinct waiting areas, restrooms, and water faucets. Many eateries flat out declined to serve them. They were rejected by businesses. The local cops came after them. They were treated with disdain by white folks. Conditions on base were just slightly improved. Separate barracks, dining areas, and training programs were instituted for white and black troops. There was still segregation at the post office and the movie theater. The United States Army denied fundamental respect to black soldiers despite their earned right to wear the uniform. When they were off duty, black soldiers encountered open discrimination, hostile locals, and segregated facilities. One event made the contrast clear. Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, an amazing athlete who would eventually break baseball's color barrier, refused to transfer to the back of a bus on the Fort Hood installation in July 1944. Lieutenant Colonel Bates, the commander of Robinson's battalion, backed him up, but higher-ups stepped in, moved Robinson to a different regiment, and court-martialed him. Robinson was found not guilty in the end, but it was too late for him to go with the 760. It was evident what the message was. Black soldiers, no matter how good they were, would be regarded like second-class people. In June 1944, the order to deploy finally came. The 761st Tank Battalion got ready to go overseas after 2.5 years of training. The guys could hardly believe it. The war in Europe had been going on for over 5 years. It was June 6th, the day of D-Day. Allied troops were setting up camp in France. There was a dire demand for armored units. Finally, the 761st would be able to show what they had been saying all along. They were all set. They got on the troop ship Esperance Bay at New York Harbor on the 27th of August, 1944. 712 soldiers and their personal gear got ready for the trip across the Atlantic. They weren't able to bring their tanks. They would be given out in England, but they brought everything else: tools, weapons, replacement parts, and personal items. As troops loaded supplies and equipment, the docks were filled with the ordered chaos of embarkation. The Esperance Bay was a British ship that was one of hundreds that moved men and supplies across the Atlantic to support the war in Europe. The rooms were small. In holes that had been turned into troop quarters, soldiers slept in bunks stacked 4 high. There were shifts for serving meals. There wasn't much space, but the males were in a good mood. They were finally going to fight, after years of waiting. The 10-day trip to England provided them time to think about what was going to happen next. They were set to be the first black armored regiment to fight in Europe. Before them, other black battalions had fought. The 92nd Infantry Division had fought in Italy. Black artillery battalions had helped white infantry divisions, but no black tank battalion had fought in Europe yet. The 761st would go first. They felt the weight of representation on their shoulders. Every move would be looked at closely. Every error would be amplified. Success would call into question common ideas about race. Failure would prove them right. The 760 first got the newest variant of the Sherman tank, the M4A3, with the better 76mm gun when they got to England. This was a big step forward from the 75mm rifle they had used in Texas. The 76mm could penetrate armor better, which made it better at fighting German Panthers and Tigers. American tankers had a better chance against the stronger German armor they would face in battle, because their guns had longer barrels and better ammo. The Ford Gay V8 engine in the M4A3 model was likewise more powerful, with 450 horsepower. This engine made the Sherman faster and better at climbing hills than older models. The 30-ton tank was more responsive in battle because of the better engine plant. It could move swiftly and use the terrain to its advantage. These changes made a difference. In tank battles, speed and firepower might spell the difference between life and death. They trained for a short time in the UK, getting used to the new vehicles, practicing shooting, and doing tactical exercises. The training was short, but quite hard. They barely had a few weeks to learn how to use the new equipment before sending it to France. As American troops were ready for battle, the sounds of tank engines and gunfire resonated through British training camps in southern England. The 760 first trained with British armored units and white American units. Some white American soldiers were surprised to encounter black tankers. Some British soldiers, who were less impacted by American racism, saw them as just other soldiers. Then they went to France. The trip over the English Channel was hard. Tank crews, many of whom had never been to sea before their trip across the Atlantic, had a hard time with seasickness as landing boats pitched and rocked in the Channel waters. But they did it. 4 months after D-Day, they landed on Omaha Beach on the 10th of October 1944. The 5-chapter DD beachhead was safe, but the sand was still littered with the wreckage of battle, broken equipment, ruined fortifications, and the eerie feeling of ground that had been paid for in blood. The 760 first moved quickly inland, using both rail and road to get to the front lines. They got to their assembly area near the French-German border on the 28th of October 1944. General George Patton, who was in charge of the Third Army, had expressly asked for the 761st to help him push toward the Siegfried Line. People knew Patton for his contentious demeanor and his strong methods in armored combat. He also had a lot of convoluted ideas about race. He had worked with Buffalo soldiers early in his career, and thought highly of their fighting skills. But he also had the same biases that were widespread among people of his age and social position. Patton's speech to the 761st on October 28 was typical of him. It was quite direct. "You are the first black men to ever fight in the American army as tankers. If you weren't good, I wouldn't have asked you. My army is made up of just the best people. I don't care what color you are as long as you go up there and murder those crude sons of people are watching you and expecting great things from you. Your race is most excited about your success. Don't let them down. And for God's sake, don't let me down." The speech had a typical pattern, with swearing, motivation, and an acknowledgement of the racial dynamics at play. The guys in the 761st got what was going on. They were being tried. Not alone would they be judged as soldiers, but also as representations of their own race. They had been preparing for this moment for 30 months, so the strain was huge. The 761st Tank Battalion went into battle on the 7th of November 1944. The initial goal was the German-held town of Morville-l'Evêque in northeastern France. The village was on both sides of a crucial road that the Germans had fortified. The defenders had not been able to move after previous American advances. The 761st was part of the 26th Infantry Division and was told to end the stalemate. Captain John Long of B Company led the attack. Long was a no-nonsense officer from Detroit who earned the respect of his troops by being brave and good at his job. Sergeant Roy King was in charge of the lead Sherman tank behind him. The onslaught started at daybreak. When King's tank entered Morville-l'Evêque, a German soldier with a Panzerfaust, an anti-tank rocket launcher, fired from a structure. The shaped charge hit the side of the Sherman, knocking it out of action and injuring 2 crew members. The situation was very bad. The lead tank couldn't move, which blocked the tiny street. German defenders were coming together at the position. King and his men pulled the hurt soldiers behind the tank to safety. Then they murdered the Panzerfaust, a gunner, and the crew of a nearby German anti-tank gun with small arms and the tank's remaining operable weaponry. The rest of B Company moved into the town. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers ran into a German barrier made up of a fallen tree and mines that stopped his progress. German mortar and small arms fire kept the troops that was with them from moving. The whole attack was in danger of getting stuck. Without thinking, Rivers got out of his tank. He hooked a tow line to the barrier and got back into his Sherman while being shot at. His tank pulled the obstruction out of the way, letting the column go forward and the men get out of their exposed position. Rivers would eventually get the Silver Star for this action. The 761st had taken Morville-l'Evêque by the end of the day on November 7. The Germans fought hard to protect themselves, but the Black Panthers, which was the battalion's nickname based on their unit emblem, won. The price was high. Sergeant Roy King died from his injuries. There were more casualties, but the 761st had shown they could fight. But more crucially, they had shown they could win. German prisoners arrested at Morville-l'Evêque told us something we didn't expect. Confusion. Wehrmacht officers had been taught that black American soldiers were poorly trained, badly led, and would crack under duress. Instead, they had run into an armored infantry force who worked together efficiently, moved with precision, and fought with all their might. A captured German officer said that Sergeant King's actions were identical to those of a Russian tank crew in the same situation, showing that he was tactically skilled. The 761st moved ahead. They fought at Vickers on November 8. After 4 hours of fighting, they attacked Château-Salins on November 9. They took Durs on November 10. Every encounter followed the same pattern. The Black Panthers fought well, changed their tactics when the battlefield changed, and attained their goals. At Vixar-Sy, they came across German defensive positions that had stopped previous attacks. The settlement was on high ground, which made it easy for defenders to see and shoot at enemies. The roadways leading to the German tanks were protected by anti-tank weapons. Machine gun nests were in charge of important crossroads. The 761st worked with infantry, utilizing smoke to hide German observation and tank fire to suppress defensive positions. At Château-Salins, they had to deal with a tougher defense. German soldiers had reinforced stone buildings, making strong points that controlled the center of the town. Tank main guns worked well against these fortifications, slowly destroying them while infantry cleared out nearby buildings. The battalion's fighting skills improved during the course of the 4-hour engagement. They were learning, changing, and getting better with each fight. The men were amazed at how well they did when they were under fire. They had trained for years to be good at their jobs, but fighting showed who they really were. Fear was around, but they were able to keep going. The noises of war, the smell of gunpowder, and the sight of dead bodies all grew easier to deal with through training and good leadership. Tank commanders stayed calm and made choices while being shot at. Even though it was dangerous, crews followed directions. The battalion worked the way it was supposed to. People talked about Sergeant Warren Cressy's bravery for years. When a German anti-tank gun destroyed his Sherman, Cressy leaped out, took control of a machine gun on a nearby half-track, and used it to kill the enemy crew. After that, he got on another tank and kept battling. He was given a battlefield appointment to second lieutenant for what he did. Cressy's record in battle for the whole campaign was amazing. He fought in the front non-stop, showing tactical expertise and personal bravery that earned him the respect of everyone who saw it. Tank commanders who worked with him remembered how cool he was under fire, how quickly he could make tactical judgments, and how eager he was to put himself in risk to get the job done. These traits, which were shared by dozens of individuals in the battalion, made up the unit's character. There weren't simply one or two great people in the 761st. It was a whole battalion of trained, motivated, and capable men who did their jobs under the most difficult conditions possible. All of the tank crews did their jobs well. Every platoon followed orders like an expert. The unit as a whole reached its goals over and over again, even though it faced strong opposition. The unit's accomplishment was important because of this group of people. It showed that black soldiers, in general, not just a few exceptional ones, could fight as well as any other military. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, perhaps the most interesting anecdote about the 761st's early battle. Rivers was in charge of a company's push toward Gibling on November 16, when his Sherman hit a mine at a railroad crossing. The blast ripped through the tank's belly armor and sent pieces of metal flying through the crew compartment. Rivers had it the worst. Metal pieces cut through his leg from the knee to the thigh, all the way to the bone. The wound was so bad that they had to leave right away. Captain David Williams, the commander of the company, and a medic got to Rivers' position. They brought medication to numb the pain before they left. Williams thought back on the conversation later. "You're going back, Reuben. You have a wound that costs $1 million. This is your way to get home." Rivers said no. He said he wouldn't take morphine since it would make it hard for him to think clearly. He wouldn't leave because his guys needed him. The medics cleansed and bandaged the wound, but Rivers could see German artillery observers marking the spot. He got aboard another Sherman and took over as commander of the Kreps. Rivers stayed with the company all night on November 16 as they were ready to attack Gibling. By the morning of November 17, his leg had become very large. The infection was starting to spread. The wound was getting worse. Every move made the pain worse. Captain Williams told everyone to leave again. Rivers said no again. "You should know better than that, Captain. This is going to be hard." Rivers spearheaded the attack on Gibling. Later, the crew of his tank said that he told them to fire through gritted teeth, with sweat running down his face from anguish and fever. The Germans fought hard to protect Gibling. The 761st lost 3 tanks to anti-tank fire and 1 to mines as they were seizing the town. Throughout the day, Rivers' Sherman attacked enemy positions, taking away machine gun nests and keeping German forces from moving. Rivers kept in charge of his tank until November 17 and 18. His health got worse very quickly. The infection was becoming worse. Medical officers who saw him in the field were appalled that he was still fighting. It was evident by the morning of November 19 that Rivers was dying. Gangrene had turned his leg black. Fever made him feel terrible, but a company was told to go toward Borgel Trough, and Rivers wouldn't let them leave him behind. A group left Gibling first thing in the morning. Heavy anti-tank fire from hidden German positions hit them almost instantly. His tanks were told to retreat to safety by Captain Williams. The enemy's anti-tank guns were located, according to Rivers' radio transmission. Moving forward to engage, he and another Sherman covered the company's departure. German artillery focused on the 2 American tanks that were exposed. Rivers' Sherman took numerous hits from armor-piercing bullets. One of them got inside the tower. Tank detonation occurred. Instantaneous death befell Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. Victims included 2 other crew members. Wounded were the surviving. Despite suffering a fatal injury on day 1, Rivers fought for 3 days. Thanks to his bravery and leadership, a squad was able to take 2 strongly held towns and deal heavy damage to the Germans. Although it took until January 19975, 3 years after his death, Rivers would finally win the Medal of Honor for his deeds from November 16 to 19, it was worth the wait. Combat was carried on by the 761st Tank Battalion. Appropriate time for grieving was not available. Moving ahead at all times was a must in the battle. The final major German onslaught in the West began on the 16th of December 1944. A hazardous salient in American defenses was formed during the Battle of the Bulge, which caught the Allies by surprise and threatened to reach the port of Antwerp. A hasty northward movement was made to assist in halting the German advance by the 761st. Assembled with the 87th Infantry Division, they were immediately thrust into the battle for the Belgian town of Tillet. The advance north was disorganized. The poetry had the Allied forces on the edge of their seats. A German surprise attack, units withdrawing, refugees, and supply columns jammed the roads. On January 6, 1945, the 760 made it to their assembly spot despite all the mayhem. Without delay, they set out to do something. One of the most intense conflicts that the Black Panthers would ever face was the fight for Tilly. With a zealous devotion, the town was guarded by German SS Panzer troopers. These units were elite, consisting of seasoned veterans who knew how to fight against armor from their time on the Eastern Front. Approach routes, mining roads, and fortified structures were all meticulously prepared for Tillet by deploying anti-tank guns. They were hell-bent on keeping. The addition of winter weather really made things worse. The mercury plummeted below the freezing point. There was snowfall of up to several feet in some areas. It was common for the blowing snow to restrict visibility to meters. It was a brutally frigid day. Engines of tanks have difficulty starting. Some mechanical parts stopped working. Loading ammunition without first warming it would cause jams. The crew bundled up in every article of clothes they could find, but the frigid weather persisted. On the freezing terrain, the Sherman's thin tracks had trouble getting traction. The ice made the tanks skid and slide. On hills, drivers battled for control. The tank's 30 tons were less effectively dispersed among the smaller tracks, making them less grippy on snow and ice. Things that were easy to move in the summer were very dangerous in the winter. Something novel was encountered by the 761st during the Till operation. Psychological warfare intended directly at them as black soldiers. The American-born propagandist Mildred Gillars, better known as Axis Sally, jammed American communications channels with her German radio broadcasts. Greetings, African-American troops of the 761st. Your death in TLIT today is my deepest regret. We are not fighting alongside American blacks, and you are not fighting with us. Black people in Cleveland are rioting. Captain Williams, your commander, is guiding you towards disaster and death. Unlike you, he is white. Major George, who commands your unit, is white and not a member of your own ethnic group. Get out of your tanks and go back to Cleveland, where you're needed and safe. Louis Armstrong's music, namely I Cannot Give You Anything But Love, Baby, was playing in the background during the broadcast. The complex psychological operation aimed to capitalize on racial tensions by persuading black soldiers that the battle they were fighting was really white men's struggle. It was a total bust. The 760th soldiers knew from the start what they were fighting for. Axis Sally's program represented a racist philosophy, and we must fight against it, not only Nazi Germany. The memorable retort that Tank Commander Frank Cochran radioed to his company went down in history. I am still refusing to back down, even after they have hit me 3 times. Tilly was initially seized by the 760 following days of intense combat in close quarters. Upon surrendering, the German defenders were taken aback to learn that black soldiers had vanquished them. What brings you to Tella? Inquired one inmate. White people are winning this war. Everyone could see that Nazi racial ideology was incorrect. Those who held firm to their theories could not. The broad and well-documented Nazi propaganda regarding the inferiority of black soldiers was immense. Predating the start of the war by decades, the dictatorship had promoted narratives that portrayed black people in a dehumanizing light through propaganda campaigns. These campaigns accomplished a lot. Domestically, they served to bolster Nazi racial ideology. They indoctrinated German troops to see their adversaries as beneath them. Using ethnic tensions as a wedge, they sought to split the Allies. These views had been built up by the administration throughout the years. Explicit references to the taint of the white race through interaction with black people were found in Hitler's Mein Kampf, written in 1925 and 1926. Racial mixing, the authors contended, would hasten society's collapse. The Nazi ideology that was taught in schools, propagated through media, and imposed by law was based on these ideals, not on fringe opinions. Black Germans were also subject to the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which were mostly aimed at Jews. The term racially alien was used to describe people of African origin. They were subject to institutionalized bias, social exclusion, and, in the end, physical violence. Between 1937 and 1945, the Nazi racial hygiene programs forcibly sterilized over 500 Afro-Germans, defined as Germans with African ancestry. Nazis feared what they dubbed racial contamination, therefore they set out to stop it. In November 1944, the German military tried to persuade African-American soldiers serving in the United States that they were fighting for a nation that oppressed them by distributing propaganda leaflets to them. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has a number of these pamphlets that show lynchings and other forms of prejudice in the United States. They wanted to know why African-American troops were putting themselves on the line for a nation that despised them. The psychological operation was well planned, but it failed to motivate the black soldiers because it failed to take their awareness of the enemy into account. Nazi propaganda cartoons portrayed African-American troops as backwards and unable to fight in today's world. Illustrations depicting black American troops as barbaric, subhuman monsters endangering civilization were published in German propaganda periodicals. The Nazi ideology accentuated centuries-old racist prejudices, which these paintings derived from. This propaganda was played for the Wehrmacht soldiers the whole time they were training and serving. It was fully internalized by many. African French soldiers in WWII were depicted in the Black Horror on Rhine propaganda campaign as barbarians who massacred German people. The German people believed these false claims, which they carried with them into World War II as part of their narrative, even though they were mostly unfounded. In order to prepare German soldiers to confront what they were led to believe would be inferior enemies, Wehrmacht training materials reinforced these notions. Black units were routinely underrated in German military intelligence reports of American forces, which led to the prediction that they would crumble under stress and perform poorly in battle. Rather than being based on objective analysis, many evaluations revealed ideological predisposition. Many German soldiers suffered cognitive dissonance and started to doubt Nazi ideology when reality went against these predictions. Quite the opposite was true, as it turned out. Even after the snow fell in 1944 and into 1945, the 760 kept on the go. They helped break through the Siegfried Line in March 1945 during the Rhineland War. This achievement was really noteworthy. Along Germany's western border were a set of fortifications called the Siegfried Line, or the West Wall as it was known to the Germans. It began in the Netherlands and ended in Switzerland, a distance of roughly 400 meters. The network had almost 18,000 underground passages, bunkers, and tank traps, interlocking firefields, dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped concrete barriers, minefields encircling entrances, and anti-tank and machine gun positions were all found within the concrete defenses. After years of construction, the Germans believed their fortifications were practically impregnable. Coordination of infantry tank attacks against fortified positions held by seasoned German soldiers fighting for their homeland was necessary to break through. Several attacks against Siegfried Line positions were carried out by the 761st. Extensive preparation was necessary for every assault. Engineers removed mines and destroyed barriers while tanks used cover fire. Armor and infantry moved in tandem, supporting one another as they approached. German defensive defenses were weakened by artillery fire, while soldiers and tanks advanced into attack positions. These conflicts were premeditated assaults against fortified positions meant to maintain peace. They called for bravery, coordination, and perseverance. A remarkable tactical triumph was accomplished by the 761st between March 20 and 23, 1945. During this 4-day attack, we broke through the Sief's Friedline positions near Rhein-Durkheim, which were heavily defended. German forces were taken together with 3,210 enemy fatalities, dead and wounded, and 3,210 detainees. Regular Wehrmacht infantry, parts of the Luftwaffe Field Division, and the Volkster militia all contributed to the defense of this territory. With this breakthrough, the Allies were able to push further into German territory, causing the German defensive lines to crumble and the war to end much sooner than expected. The complete development of the battalion's combat efficacy was shown in just one mission. The novice unit that had gone into battle in November had matured into a seasoned group that could carry out intricate combined arms operations despite fierce resistance. Their triumph demonstrated the primacy of talent, education, and direction above racial differences. Repeatedly, the 760 carried out this objective. As they gained expertise, their strategies shifted. They figured out how to synchronize their firing to neutralize the German anti-tank guns. They perfected methods for evacuating cities and strongholds. By learning to coordinate the use of armor with infantry, artillery, and air support, they became masters of combined arms combat. The Black Panthers were one of the most seasoned armored units in Patton's Third Army by the end of March 1945. The 761st handled the German detainees with professionalism and humanity in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Another fissure in Nazi ideology was created by this conduct, which was so contrary to what the German soldiers had been instructed to expect from black soldiers. Who else could the Nazis have deceived if they lied about black soldiers being savages? Capture by African American soldiers was the turning point for some German POWs, who would later testify when they started to doubt all they had learned under the Third Reich. The 761st penetrated well into Germany after crossing the Rhine River at the tail end of March 1945. A huge operation by the Allies was the crossing of the Rhine. The river was the final great natural barrier that Germany had in the West. The Allies could launch an assault into Germany's industrial core once they crossed. As part of a large-scale movement of personnel and supplies, the 761st made the crossing. Pontoon bridges were built by engineers. Units responsible for traffic control directed the movement of cars. The crossing was executed with precision and professionalism, showcasing the Allied advantage in logistics. They took part in the German encirclement in the Ruhr Pocket for the next several weeks. The German ability to protect Western Germany was essentially undermined by this enormous operation, which ensnared hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht and SS soldiers. This region was the industrial core of Germany. If we were to lose it, we would also lose the ability to manufacture supplies, ammo, and weapons. The encirclement was an effort to be broken by German forces. Their attempt was unsuccessful. The noose was methodically tightened by the Allied forces. In order to stop the Germans from forming fresh defensive lines, the 761st was ordered to keep the pressure on the retreating enemy. They moved swiftly during pursuit operations to throw off hostile units. They tried to retreat while engaging in skirmishes with German forces. They took villages whose inhabitants had not yet gotten the signal to flee. It was thrilling and tiring at the same time. Now that their enemies had crumbled, they could finally press their advantage after months of tedious fighting against well-prepared defenses. In the aftermath of the battle, the names of the cities they conquered became jumbled together. Agricultural towns, small German villages, and industrial suburbs. Everything needed to be checked. They may all have defenders. Even though they were exhausted, the tank personnel kept their eyes peeled for danger and were prepared to engage. Close behind, infantry cleared buildings and captured prisoners. The pattern started to feel natural. Get close to the city. Use tank fire to subdue any opposition. Cavalry charges forward. Structures that are easy to understand. Proceed to the next task. A large number of German automobiles were destroyed by them. Despite equipment wear and constant combat stress, they kept up their operational effectiveness throughout the war. Tank upkeep was very important. Tracks got worn down. Engines needed to be fixed. Weapons had to be cleaned. The guns had to be loaded. There had to be fuel. The maintenance crews and supply workers who kept the tanks going didn't get much credit. But the combat teams would not have been able to work without them. Their maintenance teams did amazing work keeping the vehicles running. They worked all night, often under fire, to fix broken systems and replace broken parts on the Shermans so they could keep moving. People had to get creative and determined to keep some vehicles running that should have been sent to repair depots in the rear areas. Damaged tanks were used as parts by crews. They made repairs out of items that were handy. Whatever it took to keep their cars in the fight, they did it. Their tank leaders learned how to fight with new soldiers who didn't have as much training as the original battalion members. As of April 1945, the battalion's members had changed a lot. Losses in battle and injuries that happened outside of battle were replaced with new people. These replacements often came straight from school and had never been in battle before, so they had to learn quickly. Veterans on the crew taught them. They were made part of the crews of tanks by the leaders. These new troops were quickly integrated into the battalion, which kept its effectiveness. The unit was held together by the willpower of those in charge, from Lieutenant Colonel Bates to company and platoon officers. The 761st was told to push toward Austria at the end of April 1945. They were some of the first American groups to join up with the troops coming from the east. Tanks from the 761st met Soviet tanks near Steyr, Austria on the 26th of April 1945. The meeting was important. Berlin was split in two by Allied forces from the east and the west. The Third Reich was over. The men of the 761st will never forget their meeting with Soviet troops. Women worked on Soviet tank teams. Leonard Smith, a gunner in the 761st, remembered being hugged by a Russian woman tanker who yelled "America" over and over again and almost crushed him with her excitement. The culture exchange was short, but it meant a lot. A moment of victory was shared by soldiers who had fought thousands of miles to beat fascism. It was Victory in Europe Day on the 8th of May 1945. The war in Europe was over for good. For 183 days straight, the 761st Tank Battalion had been in battle. In Europe, no other American armored unit fought for so long without getting any help. The Great Record was publicly recognized by a presidential unit citation that President Jimmy Carter signed in 1978. There were some very interesting statistics about their work. They were a part of 4 major Allied operations: the campaign in northern France, the campaign in the Rhineland, the campaign in Ardennes, Alsace, and the war in Central Europe. They fought in Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria, among other places. They took or freed more than 30 towns. In the 183-day battle, they killed about 130,000 German soldiers in direct combat, by coordinating artillery and by working with infantry divisions to do operations together. In battle, 3 officers and 31 infantrymen from the 761st were killed. There were wounds for 22 officers and 180 regular men. In November 1944 alone, 44 people in the company died from injuries, illnesses, and combat fatigue that did not happen in battle. According to the Presidential Unit citation, the total death rate was close to 50% when replacements were received, and then lost over 183 days of non-stop combat. The battalion members got 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, and around 300 Purple Hearts for their service. For his bravery, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers was given the Medal of Honor by President Bill Clinton on the 13th of January 1997. The 761st Tank Battalion received the Presidential Unit citation from President Jimmy Carter in 1978 for their outstanding bravery and success. The 10th of April 1978 was the formal date of the citation. However, numerical metrics cannot capture the 761st's greatest influence. The racial assumptions that had long governed American military thinking were dramatically challenged by their battlefield performance. With the right guidance, resources, and instruction, black soldiers could hold their own against any white unit. Efforts to desegregate the United States Armed Forces, both politically and militarily, would rely heavily on this evidence. For the guys of the 761st, returning home was a mixed bag of emotions. They had valiantly battled for their nation and vanquished an adversary hell-bent on racial supremacy. They were hoping for appreciation, acknowledgement, and praise. Renewing discrimination was what many people got instead. A segregated America awaited the 760 veterans upon their return. Certain restaurants, hotels, and districts were off-limits to them. Combat tank commanders were demoted to low-level administrative positions. People who had never left their homes casually showed racism toward heroes who had received silver stars. The rift was radicalizing and excruciating. American freedom was at stake for the 761st's troops. Through the most difficult test conceivable, they had demonstrated their value. Their status as second-class citizens persisted, though. Thousands of Black World War II veterans repeated this story, and it helped spark the civil rights movement. America could not legitimately deny Black citizens their rights at home if it could ask them to fight and die for freedom abroad. There was no way to disprove the argument anymore. The bravery, skill, and selflessness displayed by Black veterans were on par with that of any American soldier. It was the moral bankruptcy of segregation to deny them equal rights at home while celebrating their achievements overseas. Overwhelming political pressure ensued. In their fight for equality, organizations such as the NAACP cited the battle records of units like the 761st. In addition to reporting on domestic prejudice, Black publications covered acts of valor on the battlefield. It was impossible to turn a blind eye to the inconsistency. While fighting fascism overseas, veterans faced prejudice at home, as they testified before Congress. There was no intellectual argument that could compare to the weight of their testimonies. Patriotism was their driving force. Despite the danger, they had shown their worth. Acknowledgement was what they wanted. A role was also played by white veterans. After serving with or being assisted by Black tank battalions or other Black support forces in combat, many soldiers came home with new views. Black troops had fought and died before their eyes. Black tankers had rescued them. Those who had never served before were wronged by their evidence. Reports attesting to the efficacy of Black combat personnel were filed by military leaders, including those who had first opposed them. There was a mountain of evidence. After much deliberation, President Harry Truman desegregated the U.S. military on the 26th of July, 1948, by signing Executive Order 9981. The necessity of providing all members of the armed forces with equal treatment and opportunities, regardless of race, was emphasized in the directive. The fighting record of troops like the 761st gave Truman the empirical basis he needed, yet his actions were driven by both moral conviction and political calculation. A lot of people were against the order. A number of high-ranking military officials felt that integrated units would reduce their effectiveness in battle. Political reprisal was threatened by a few Southern politicians. Instead of leading integrated units, some officers chose to quit. Nevertheless, the directive remained in place. The principle was created through gradual implementation that took several years to fulfill fully. Assignments and opportunities in the military would no longer be based on race. Important evidence that segregation was both morally wrong and tactically useless was revealed by the combat performance of units such as the 761st Tank Battalion. Military research found that integrated units would be more reflective of American democratic principles and perform similarly to their segregated counterparts. During the Korean War, the Army's Project Clear research looked at both integrated and segregated groups. It ran from 1949 to 1951. Its results corroborated the 760's prior findings. Combat efficacy was unrelated to race. We prioritized training, leadership, and unit cohesion. Skin color did not. The legacy of the 761st extended far beyond military policy. Members of the battalion became educators, business leaders, and civil rights activists. They carried with them the knowledge that they had proven something fundamental. When given equal opportunity, Black Americans achieved at the highest levels. This knowledge, born in combat, shaped the rest of their lives. They returned to communities across America, bringing with them not just combat experience, but a transformed understanding of their own capabilities and their rights as citizens. They had commanded complex machines in battle. They had made life and death decisions under fire. They had proven themselves equal to any soldiers in the world. This experience made them unwilling to accept second-class citizenship quietly. They became activists, educators, community leaders who demanded the equality they had earned through service. Some pursued higher education using the GI Bill. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 provided educational benefits to veterans. For many black veterans, this represented their first opportunity for college education. They attended historically black colleges and universities across the South. They enrolled in integrated universities in the North and West. They pursued degrees in engineering, medicine, law, education, business. Their wartime experience had shown them what they could achieve. Their education gave them tools to achieve it. Captain Ivan Harrison, who commanded troops in the 761st, later became a physician. He attended medical school after the war, completed his residency, and practiced medicine for decades. His path from tank commander to doctor exemplified the potential unlocked when barriers fell. Harrison's story was repeated across the battalion. Men who might never have attended college in a segregated America used their veteran benefits and their proven capabilities to build professional careers. Leonard Smith worked for the New York Transit Authority Police, rising to a position of responsibility. He served his community in uniform again, this time as a law enforcement officer rather than a soldier. His military experience prepared him for this role. The discipline, the leadership training, the ability to function under pressure, all skills learned in combat served him well in civilian life. Countless other veterans of the battalion contributed to their communities, carrying with them the pride of having served in a unit that changed history. They joined churches, civic organizations, veterans groups. They coached youth sports teams. They mentored young people. They served on school boards and city councils. They were active, engaged citizens who had earned their citizenship through service and demanded it be respected. Some became teachers, bringing military discipline and high expectations to their classrooms. They taught in segregated schools across the South, preparing the next generation of Black Americans for the opportunities they knew were coming. They taught in integrated schools in the North and West, demonstrating through their own achievements what Black Americans could accomplish. Their presence in these roles challenged stereotypes and opened minds. Others went into business, starting companies, creating jobs, building wealth in their communities. They used skills learned in the Army, organizational ability, leadership, mechanical knowledge to build successful enterprises. They proved that Black Americans could succeed in business just as they had succeeded in combat. Their success created economic opportunity for others and demonstrated pathways to prosperity. In 2005, the United States Army dedicated a monument to the 761st Tank Battalion at Fort Cavazos, Texas, formerly Fort Hood, where the battalion had trained. The monument features 4 black granite tablets surrounding a marble sculpture of a kneeling tanker. Surviving veterans attended the dedication ceremony, many in their 82nds, some in wheelchairs, all proud of what they had accomplished 6 decades earlier. The inscription honors their 183 consecutive days of combat without relief and their role in breaking Nazi racial ideology through demonstrated excellence. The 761st Tank Battalion demonstrated through action what words alone could never prove. They showed that courage recognizes no color. That skill is earned through training, not inherited through race. That leadership emerges from character, not complexion. They fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against Nazi Germany across the battlefields of Europe, another against the assumption of black inferiority that pervaded their own society. They won both wars through the same method, relentless excellence under impossible pressure. Every tank battle won became evidence against racial prejudice. Every German position captured became proof of capability. Every day of continuous combat without relief became testimony to endurance and professionalism. The Wehrmacht soldiers who had been taught that black soldiers were inferior learned the truth in combat. German troops who expected easy victories against racially inferior opponents discovered instead determined, skilled, and courageous adversaries who outfought them repeatedly. When German prisoners expressed shock at being captured by black tankers, they were confronting the collapse of an ideology built on lies. When the 761st entered combat on the 7th of November 1944, they carried more than ammunition and fuel. They carried the hopes of millions of black Americans who wanted the chance to prove their worth. They carried the burden of representation, knowing that their performance would be generalized to judge an entire race. They carried the weight of history, understanding that their actions would shape military policy and civil rights progress for generations. They bore these burdens for 183 consecutive days of combat. They never faltered. They never broke. They never gave their enemies or their doubters any evidence to support racial theories. The Black Panthers of the 761st Tank Battalion proved that Nazi racial ideology was not just morally reprehensible, but factually wrong. In doing so, they helped dismantle similar prejudices within their own nation. Their legacy extends beyond the battlefields of Europe to the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. They demonstrated that when barriers fall and opportunity opens, excellence emerges regardless of race. That lesson, purchased with blood and courage across 183 days of unrelenting combat, remains their greatest victory.